Hello and welcome to a special edition of the 3CL Foundation Young People Summit podcast. I'm your host, Trish Mallia, and today we hope to explore the evolving world of technology and its implications on consciousness, AI, and the ongoing manipulation of humanity's idea of self, and of course, if and how we can preserve what is left of the human identity. To help us explore these challenges, I have two fantastic guests to join me. The first is Reverend and Dr. Jean Gove. This is a serious introduction. Jean is a research affiliate at the AI and Humanity Lab at the University of Hong Kong, specialising in AI cognition and ethics. He earned a PhD in analytical philosophy from the University of St Andrews. Jean is also the coordinator of the European AI Research Group within the Vatican's Dicastery for Culture and Education, representing the Holy See at the Council of Europe on AI issues, and serves as a diocesan coordinator for AI activities in Malta. He also works to incorporate AI literacy into church education and develops training programs for educators and pastoral workers. And I am just going to add this note that every person I have told I'm speaking to Jean has referred to him as a rock star in these fields. So I'm going to A, have to get his autograph, and B, say I am so excited to have you here, Jean. So thank you for making the time.
Thank you. It's difficult now. There's a lot of pressure now, right?
It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. If you think you've got pressure, wait till I introduce the other guest. So I also have with me my colleague at the 3CL Foundation, Jacques Cordina. Jacques is a Gen Z content and research executive with a particular interest in how societies can adapt to technological advancement. He's currently researching the impact of AI on the multi-generational workspace. And of course, in case he feels a little bit intimidated by Jean's introduction, I would just like to add that he is also a rock star in my book. So welcome, Jean.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Very kind introduction as well.
You are a rock star. You are a rock star. So Jean, I'm going to come to you first because just to kind of frame this conversation and why everyone I think is so excited to have you in this space to talk about this stuff. So before we dive into the AI and ethics end, could you tell me just a little bit about what drew you to explore questions of technology and humanity and faith? Like, what was the big draw for you in relation to this?
Yeah, so great question. I think it's a confluence of things that happened around all the same time.
Okay.
Right. So I had just about finished my priestly studies here in Malta. This was back in 2016, 17, more or less. And I was asked by my archbishop to go and further my studies in philosophy. Right.
Okay.
AI wasn't really a thing. At least on our radar. I mean, if we're honest, it wasn't really a thing on a lot of people's radar. Now, AI has existed for years, but obviously I think a lot of us, maybe in the public, right, apart from maybe the more specialized people who used to work in AI for a long time, would think of ChatGPT as the first time, right?
Yes.
Or one of the first. And that was November 2022, right? So
wow, not that long ago.
Not that long ago, but yeah. So 2016, 2017, I was having these discussions. I was asked to go and study philosophy, and which I did, right? So I went up to St. Andrews, and I was focusing more on philosophy of mind and language. Right. So again, not really that much at the time on the technology side of things. Okay. My master's kind of developed into that, right? So I focused a bit on issues of personhood and neuroprosthetics or kind of technology that aids us in our memory and therefore in preserving our identity, right? So kind of aids. So like think of people with dementia, for example, right? Or think of individuals that need sort of implants, right? Neurological implants, not that popular at the moment, but presumably in the future, right? But Elon Musk is doing something like that apparently. Yeah. And then I think as I was working on the doctorate, AI really exploded onto the scene. And first it was more of a general interest, reading the news, reading on more detail, something that was really
keeping up to date. Really.
Keeping up to date, yeah, and it was interesting me in a a casual sense, if you want, right? And then at a certain point, there was kind of watershed moment that happened personally, which was having a few conversations with people who either teach AI, right? And realizing that a lot of the issues they're facing right now, a lot of the questions they're asking, philosophy has been doing for at least the past 50, 60 years, right?
Which is true, yeah.
Which is fantastic, right? So philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, this is really up my alley. So I thought on one level, on a technical point of view, it was really a matter of sidestepping into the world of AI ethics and philosophy of AI from philosophy of mind and language. Right. And, you mentioned I studied in analytic philosophy, right? So, and the key word there, analytic, is, I suppose the best way to explain that is there's a lot and a lot of links with logic. Right.
course.
So if you're thinking logic and thought, logic and language, and then you're thinking AI, computers using logic, right? So you can see already
There's a pattern almost.
Yeah, there's maybe a common foundation, right? If you will.
Right.
So that was one element, and the other point was, as a priest, I kind of realized, of course, this wasn't a unique realization that I had alone, right? I think a lot of people were realizing that this is going to have a profound impact in society, right?
Yes.
So I kind of thought, beyond the technical kind of know-how that I was slowly gaining, I thought surely, as a priest, and as a church, we can try to find ways we can contribute and help people, help society, navigate these new realities that we're experiencing.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because I find that as a sociology student, AI and technology was never in my remit. It was only last year that it kind of came into my remit. But now I look at it, as you say, in a broader sense of society and everyone. So it's quite interesting that was the way you went. And now I'm even finding myself kind of going, well, this is a bigger issue. There's a much broader issue. And I suppose that kind of, we talk about the broader issue and we talk about the human aspect and how it's affecting society. And it kind of comes back, Jacques and I are finding in these podcasts that people are mentioning things like human agency an awful lot. What it is to be human, that idea of human agency and that affects society and so forth. And I'd like to unpack that just a little bit. So, Jean, if I could ask you, when we talk about this idea of human agency, what does it really mean in an age where the algorithm then is shaping our choice? Because, philosophy has looked at humans, our behaviour, what is the purpose of life and all of these things, which all feed into that. So, what do you think is human agency in this sphere?
Yeah. Great question for a 1 hour podcast, right? Just to sort of,
we could just do that. We could just do that question.
So, I mean, look, there's a massive history within philosophy on what agency is, and different philosophers would pick on different things. But I think there are some things which are very common, right, through all these different theories. And I think even from a theological point of view, there's even an anthropology there, right? So I think there are maybe, I don't know, we can maybe distill it down to 2 or 3 faculties that we have, right? I think the ability to know, right? The ability to want and the ability to do. And these are, I think, the 3 main elements of a choice. So, for example, we don't let children vote, until they're 16, for example, right? Adolescents, teenagers, right? And we don't allow them to vote because even though they can maybe write down the numbers on a piece of paper, they can do something, they don't really know, right, what it is they're voting,
They're
right?
doing.
The concept of, you can argue that maybe even older people might also struggle with that, but anyway, right? So knowing something is one part of agency. So if I'm hindered in, do I really know what I'm doing here? That's one element of how my agency could be affected, right, in a negative way. Do I really want what it is, right, that I'm doing or I'm choosing? So the kind of volition element, right? Do I want to do this or I desire that, right? So you kind of know what you want, and therefore you know what it is that the thing is.
Yes,
right?
You're acting upon that.
And the other is that you're doing it, right? That you're able to do what you want to do, right? So a lot of this, when you speak about agency, you're necessarily having to speak about freedom, right?
Which we'll come to now.
Right,
in a
yeah.
minute,
So the freedom to choose.
Yes.
But in a sense, freedom has also to be well informed, right? Freedom is one of the things. Knowledge, right, is the other things. Maybe also a sense of judgment as well. And maybe this we might also, because you kind of couched the question within the realm of algorithms and AI, right? So in a sense, Pope Francis once had this, once last summer, so not this summer, the summer before, right, spoke at the G7 meeting, and he spoke about AI, and interestingly, he made this fantastic distinction between decidere and scegliere, right, between deciding and choosing. So he said, a machine can choose, right, between 1, 2, 3, an option of 3, randomly choose, randomly select one, right?
Yeah.
But in a sense, we have this kind of deeper element where we can judge something, right?
What our choice will mean.
Yeah. So I can judge something as being morally good or not good or morally better.
Right.
I can judge something that I'm seeing as being beautiful or more beautiful, or I can judge a state of affairs as being true, more true, or not true, right? So we have these faculties where we can appreciate these different elements of the world, whereas AI tools, as yet, and I would argue maybe longer than just as yet, do not have these faculties, right? So
What is it like to be that thing of how Rev bread is the apple, kind of.
Yeah.
And I
that
know
definitely
Nikki
falls into
Young,
that.
my philosophy teacher, is thinking, oh, she mentioned the apple. Well done. But it is that thing that we each have that individual kind of perception of moral right, moral good, understanding that you say.
So individual, sure, and that's where and we'll get into this. I would imagine, right, the consciousness element of it all. But also, I think as human beings, regardless of, without wanting to delve into the discussion of whether this is subjective or not, we also have different faculties beyond just consciousness, which are also very human, right?
Yes.
So again, this aesthetic appreciation, consciousness is part of it, but we can also debate and say kind of, this is more beautiful than that.
Yes.
Or goodness, right? Or truth.
Yes.
So in a sense, there's this kind of deeper, I like to kind of really rile up scientists and AI techies and say this non-empirical part of us, right? Because it is non-empirical.
Lovely.
In the sense, whereas if I'm judging height or length or weight, they can use an instrument and
scientific.
But in a sense, it feels very weird to say, this decision is 0.467 more just than this other decision, right? Or I love you 6.7% more than, Jacques loves you, right? Or whatever, sorry.
Only 6.4%, Jacques.
It's a conservative estimate.
Conservative estimate, oh good.
You see what I mean? So these are non-empirical things, right? And in a sense, as human beings, we have, it seems as like this innate language that we can communicate with each other, regardless of culture, religion, where we can kind of say, well, this feels better.
Right.
Or this feels, more beautiful or whatever, or more loving. Whereas machines don't really seem to have that appreciation.
No, they don't. Jacques, how would you respond to that? I mean, is there more of for a Gen Z, do they see it that way, like that younger perspective?
Well, I don't think that we've obviously as a generation, we don't have as a well thought out sort of view of what it means to have agency. But one thing I would pick at is you mentioned volition, and I think this is becoming in the age of algorithms a bit of a almost dicey subject when young people like me look at our agency, because I think social comparison isn't a light force. So what I would like to do now needs to factor in very greatly sort of the social element of what are my peers doing. So if let's say I want to take a step back from social media, I might want to do that, but I equally still would like to remain involved in social circles. So I think that algorithms are really affecting our agency in this manner, and I think this is something that we're aware of and sort of a bit nonchalant about almost sometimes. But it's definitely, I think, a factor I feel like you divided, your definition of agency was very thorough and neatly divided into boxes. And I would just add that I think that algorithms are maybe complicating this a little bit, or
so they're taking the free will, Jacques. Sorry, so they're almost taking your free will because you're like, oh, you don't want to necessarily be off social media in case you miss something, or what choice do I make? So there's these constant subtle digital nudges. Am I correct then that free will is a little bit of a question at the moment? Jacques,
well, I think for me at least, free will was always a bit of a question, and my views on it have definitely changed over time. But I would say at the moment, the closest to the philosophical viewpoint I have is compatibilism, which is the belief that our free will is constrained by sociological and biological forces. Correct me if I'm giving inept, a bit of a summary. But I don't think that this frees us of moral responsibility, the ability to reflect and make decisions. But I do think that these digital nudges are extremely potent and subtle tools that are used by tech companies, and very often not pushing us not only to take certain actions, but to not take certain actions.
Okay.
Which is almost where it's more worrying for me.
And Jean, sorry, can I just, on that point then, say to you, then how do we reclaim that sense of agency in a world that is constantly designed to capture our attention and it's all manipulated? How do we reclaim that sense of free will or that sense of choice or that sense of agency?
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question, right? I mean, I fully agree with Jacques. Well, maybe not, I wouldn't say my view is compatibilism, but in the rest, I fully agree with you, right? And we see this even in for example, like legal processes, right?
Yeah.
Crimes of passion, for example.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have that in Malta, but in a sense, if someone kills somebody, but they're blinded by a big emotion at the time, we kind of minimize, right? The how free were they to make that choice to commit that act at the time, right? And we do this for other things. But yeah, back to your question, kind of how do you do that now? I think, at the risk of sounding very, very zen and maybe a bit of a cop-out of an answer, I think it's becoming aware. Kind of being more kind of purposeful
And conscious ourselves.
And conscious ourselves, yeah. I was going to say mindful, but I thought that would be even more clear. But in a sense, it is the case, right? Kind of, what am I doing right now?
Yeah.
On my third hour of doom scrolling, what am I doing?
What am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
Which kind of, I find funny with Gen Z, because Gen Z, the ones that I've met, they have a sense of purpose. I'm doing this for a reason. I'm learning this thing for a reason. Yet sometimes I wonder, are they asking themselves, and maybe it depends where they're based on the line of Gen Z of age, why am I doom scrolling for 3 hours? Like, what is this giving me? What am I getting back from the doom scroll, as you say? So they question some things, but they might not be questioning that thing that has them so addicted.
Yeah, I think maybe this is why maybe I kind of stuck with purposefulness. Also in Latin, in the church, we had this phrase, age quod agis, right? Do what you're doing in a sense of focus, be present in the moment. But not just be present, but kind of, how does the thing you're doing now fit into the your wider life, your wider scheme of things, the wider, your calling, your studies, your relationships, right? Is this helping you become better, become more human, or is it dehumanizing you? I mean, if anything, what I find astounding is in these conferences with, for example, really with techies and tech bros and AI people, as soon as you say something like, we need to be more human, people are like, yeah, this is true, we do need. It's like you're saying, you're giving them this massive secret, right?
Light bulb moment.
Yeah, eureka. So, and I think it's not as simple as, because actually it's very difficult, right?
Yeah, it's
everything around us is designed dull our awareness to kind of help us go to flow, alienation. There's so much we could say here, right? In philosophy, and Zizek would have a field day as well, right? I forgot the name of that film where he does the ads and the different film scenes.
A Pervert's Guide to Ideology, I think.
Right? So,
that's another podcast.
So I think in a world where a lot of things are designed to just, remove your sense of making a choice.
Yes.
Right? Call it alienation, call it whatever you want. I think, the thing we have to do is absolutely the opposite, right? It's like to be aware, to ask, to question, to become well-formed also. And how is this affecting me? Right? Some people think, when I speak with, for example, I find myself at times doing these talks or even radio programs for elderly people, right? Which I think is important as well.
Very important.
Anything from scams to whatnot, right? But once you start explaining to them, this is how Facebook works. Right? Yes. So my Facebook is not your Facebook in a way that, you know what I mean?
Yes,
right?
I have an 86-year-old
like,
father.
What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm like, the stuff I see is not the stuff you see. What? The stuff you see is tailor-made just for you to keep you there. And they're like, okay. So
we don't take the time to explain that to them.
No. So education, so being purposeful and being educated or educated, like forming oneself.
Jacques, what do you have?
I'm kind of curious, it's a bit of a question, and increasingly I agree with you, we need to activate our type 1 thinking, I think it's called, which is sort of this analytical thinking of, does this fit into my life, does this add purpose? But was this such a tricky thing 20, 30 years ago?
No, I don't think this was a tricky thing.
I think there were always things
there was always
that you could
things.
that alienated us. Like let's stick with that word, right? But I think it's also very safe to say and uncontroversial to say that I think the era we're living in now, precisely the very precise way in which the tools, the algorithms, the AI systems we have in place in recommendation systems and in other areas of our life are now in a surgical way. Almost, right?
Yeah.
Attacking maybe our freedom, if you want to call it that, right? So, and this is maybe, I can also say this on so many other questions, right? I would venture to say this is not an empirical statistic, but I would say something like 80% of the problems we're experiencing today are old problems that AI is kind of like steroids on these problems, right?
Yes.
Or fuel to the fire.
Yes.
The fire was already there, but this is more fuel. I think a small percentage of problems are like really innovatively new problems. But obviously, the thing is, just because these were old problems doesn't mean we don't need to, think about them.
But also, I think as well, I say this sometimes, Jacques has heard me say it before, that, years ago, we had not really a guidebook, but we had a moral code. Like we were taught a moral code. For whatever faith you were in, there was the 10 Commandments. You went to church. You were community based. So these things all fed into the way we made choices, how we were influenced, whether it was our religion, our family, etc. And that is kind of going slowly but surely, or maybe at high speed, depending on where you are. And so I kind of wonder. from a faith perspective then, so if our faith and our cultures had such an influence on us, 20, 30 years ago, how do we then interpret human responsibility in such a context where now we don't have those guardrails, we don't have those influences anymore, we're constantly being manipulated. So how from a faith perspective do we assist in this? Because the AI and the algorithm is just going in there so much now on those old rules or old norms. Let's call them old norms.
I think I should start by saying I might be biased in this answer, right?
Well, I know you will be biased, but that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
And I think maybe before giving my answer, I think I should say that for me, I think that there are different views of looking at faith, right, in general, but maybe I would stick more to the Christian faith, right? A lot of people out there might view or have ideas or perceptions of faith as something that restricts, something that inhibits or hinders, right? Whereas for me, the notion, and I would venture to say, the more correct, more fuller notion of faith is something that frees, right? Jesus saying, "I have come to remove the shackles from those in prison," right? To set prisoners free, to give sight to the blind, right? So not just literally, but also which are the areas where I'm blind, right? Where am I shackled? I'm shackled
figuratively.
Where am I? I'm shackled to my phone, right? Almost literally, almost there, right? So for me, faith is something that gives a sense of freedom. Why? Because I can interpret my life and the life of those around me in a more holistic way, and I would venture to say, obviously, because I believe in the faith that I believe in a way that is more true, right? So I think, in a sense, for example, and to get now to the answer, I think, for example, the key word here that faith can help us in, or at least, once again, the Christian faith, is the notion of freedom, right? We generally, in the scholastic sense, there were three levels of freedom, right? The first one is freedom. You're not in prison for no reason whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
There are technical Latin names which I forgot. To be honest, from my days back here at university in theology, right? So I apologize for my theology professors. Right. So the first freedom is this freedom where you're not actually hindered, you're not bound, you're not. Right? The second freedom is generally the freedom where we all stop at, right? The freedom to do whatever you want, right? I can become an astronaut, I become a chef, I can do whatever I want. If I want to eat, fast food every day, 3 times a day, I can do that, right? But Christian anthropology gives us a third, higher level of freedom, which is kind of this freedom for perfection, right?
Yes.
So true freedom, in a sense, as the church kind of interprets, as theology interprets that, is this ability to make decisions that will lead us towards our fulfillment, towards our flourishing, right?
Yes.
That inherently means that you do away with some things, you choose not to do some things, right? People sometimes look at this as a lack of that second level of freedom. Whereas in reality, saying no to some things lead us to this third, higher idea of freedom, which is the freedom to flourish, the freedom to be perfect, the freedom to become, if you want to use a theological language, to be holy, right?
Right.
But flourishing is maybe a word we can all kind of get behind, right? This freedom to flourish, right? So I'm free to eat fast food 3, 4, 5 times a day, every day. But in a sense, this hinders me from the freedom of that flourishing, of being the best I can be, right? And that is the highest freedom. So I think that is a very, for me at least, an important element that faith can help us in that, right? Or one of the elements.
One of the elements.
Because we got more things.
Yes.
I think like another thing would be, for example, paradoxically, inefficiency. Right? Something that makes us very human.
Yes.
In a sense, Christ became man, right? To save humanity. Well, at least is what Christians believe, right? When you think about it, it's a very inefficient way of saving humanity, right? I mean, come on.
I'm not sure he thought about that.
Well, God, omniscience kind of tends to capture that as well, right? So Christ took 30 years doing God knows what. Well, he knows what, right?
He wasn't on his phone, though.
He wasn't on his phone. No.
He was being productive.
And then saved us. So when you think about it, we could think a CEO would say, well, he could have visited more towns, more villages, done more healings, saved more people, traveled the world maybe and spoke to more people, right? So with our eyes, we think, well, he did things very inefficiently, right? But then when you think about it, the things that make us most human are the inefficient things, right?
Yeah.
You're spending time with the person you love. You're not doing it to get money, right? It's inefficient. If you like to write poetry or do art to express yourself, it's very inefficient, of almost of no value whatsoever, right? So in a sense, I think we are trying to be efficient in everything. Whereas I think the thing that makes us most most human is the ability to do inefficient things.
And it's interesting that you actually put it that way, because a lot of the manipulation that you see online is this to be more efficient, to be more beautiful, to be more perfect, it's all this manipulating you to be something that probably is not the natural course of whom you are, or your state of whom you are. And I know you work in education and probably, with a lot of young people and things like that. And I'm just wondering how you see in your day-to-day or your connections that you make, particularly in education, the Gen Z are understanding this idea of being true to themselves and their identity, or is it all now just manipulation all the time?
I don't think it's fair to say it's just manipulation all the time.
Good. That's good.
No, I don't think it's fair to say. But obviously, I think Gen Z, Gen Alpha after them, I feel sorry for them in the sense because I think they have to face challenges that we didn't have to face, right? I think my childhood, and I'm not that old, my childhood was simpler than their childhood is,
Very
right?
much
Or
so.
was in the case of Gen Z, right? So if anything, I think they need more help. And they deserve our help because, in a sense, not me and you, or us, but we, our generation or older generations, have created the world that they now have to live in.
Yes.
Right. So I think we have a sense of duty towards them. Right. I think there's always a desire to be authentic, and I think they have that desire to be authentic. But I think the issue is more that because of all this noise that they are bombarded with, metaphorically,
Yes.
because of all this noise, I think it's difficult to find out what really. What really gives me a sense of meaning? What really gives me a sense of purpose? Why am I here, right? What should I dedicate my life to, right? Because of all the myriad of things that they see online or hear or whatever the appears, in order to be happy, you need to look like you're 20 even when you're 60, right? You need to have money, cars, houses, right? You need to have also the toxic stuff, right? If you're a man, you need to have so many women, right? And all of this, right? So because of all these things, all these people telling them, this is what you need to be happy, right?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult for them to dig deeper and to find what is it truly that makes me happy, makes me fulfilled, gives me a sense of purpose or meaning.
And Jacques, obviously you're a young man. So do you think that this AI-driven content is making it harder then for young people to discern this level of authenticity from the manipulation? Or once again, and we've talked about this before in the podcast, is that dependent on where they come on the generational lines? We mentioned Alpha, you're older Gen Z. So what's your take on that?
So firstly, I'm pretty glad that Jean sort of gave the answer that yes, it is more difficult for us. Maybe I'm reading between the lines, but sort of didn't advocate for sort of this preaching from older to younger people.
Not that old, Jacques?
No.
He's only really 22. I'm only 26.
I mean, they can't see you, so from your voice you might as well.
Oh,
be.
they'd know from one of the two of those podcasts what age I am.
But I do think it's getting harder for everyone, and I am quite grateful for the fact that sort of technology was not always such a central part of my life. I remember when we got the first computer in our house, even though obviously my parents had computers before. I remember when my parents only had one mobile between them. So I do think that, as Jean alluded to, things are more complicated for Generation Alpha. But I also think that we are developing our own strategies of getting past this. I think we have a new set of problems in that also we have a curation problem, whereas there was always information problem, like of accessing information, of figuring out who you are, where now everyone is telling you, or there are lots of different forces pushing you to be...
Too many voices almost.
It can feel like that, I think, at times.
Okay.
But I think that we are getting better at figuring it out, at curating ourselves amongst all of these voices, this noise. So I am somewhat optimistic, but I should also say that I think we're also coming to a point where whilst I said this is a new problem, there are also some old answers. And I think that a lot of how I've gone about curating my sense of authenticity, for example, was impacted by the principles that were taught to me by my parents, by older friends of mine. So I think there's this sort of balance to be had.
It's interesting that you say, these voices, when I grew up, and if you had a problem, your mother told you to pray to Holy God. and you'd sit and you'd pray to Holy God, or if you lost something, St. Francis. Or St. Anthony. Actually, I don't know how.
My goodness.
Listen, my father has given so much money to St. Anthony over the years. He's got my will and testament is with St. Anthony. I don't know how I forgot his name. But you were made pray. That's what you were made to do. But now I can just ask Alexa. Now I can just go to Gemini or some other form of technology. And it begs the question, and I'm sorry, and my father's going to kill me for saying these words, but do we need God? Do we need faith? If this thing can give us the answer and I don't need to sit and ponder, should I invest in that because, well, Alexa, what do you think? Or should I, get this thing set out? Gemini, what's your view on it? There you go, Jean. What do you think?
Yeah.
Is Alexa going to solve all the problems for us? Is the spiritual cost of all this technology going to ruin us? Spiritually?
There are a lot of questions here, or rather, I should say, there are a lot of maybe assumptions where people might get off the train, right? So let's kind of assume, assume God exists, right? Let's assume God exists. I think it exists, but let's assume God exists.
Hope
I hope you do your research.
Yeah. We tend to have that position, hopefully. So I think comparing, Alexa or whatever AI system or tool you use to God, I think. Not you or whoever reasons like that, I think betrays one of two things or both things, right? I think a very reductive view of who God is or what God is or what God does, and the opposite of a reductive view, a fantasized, whimsical view of what AI is, right? Because I think asking an AI tool for questions on your life is like asking, remember those 8 balls you kind of shake and you get an answer, should I buy this burger? Yes, you can. In a sense, right? So, now, in no way or shape or form am I saying, these AI tools are useless.
No, everything has its
Because
function.
obviously, I would give some credence to an AI tool that gives me knowledge about the stock market, for example, right? There's a lot of numbers, a lot of statistics there. I don't know any of that, right? And presumably a tool, a machine that is trained on statistics, economy, stocks, and all that mumbo jumbo would give me more information, right? So sure. But again, on questions which are going back to what we said before, non-empirical, right?
Yeah.
What gives meaning, right? Should I look after my mother, or what's important for me? Should I make this decision? Is taking this job good for me? Will it help me grow? Am I in a toxic relationship, right? All these things. I think these aren't things that, a machine can give you an answer to these things, but it goes back to the choosing and deciding, right? It's just giving you a random answer between these three. And, some decisions in my life, I wouldn't want that decision being made on a random output, right? I want that appreciation, that moral, deeper judgment of the situation I'm in, or my future, or what does this mean to me, right? So, no, I don't think AI tools can be likened to God in that sense. But obviously, this means that we need to have a much fuller, a more fuller understanding of who God is, what God does. Does it have a spiritual cost? I think that was also
because I think that leads to that spiritual cost.
Yeah, so I think maybe spiritual is different people might understand different things about that, right?
True, that is true.
So, but I like the Italians. They use this kind of word, the mystical, and the mystical also refers to the fact that, for example, there's seasons and different crops grow at different times.
Oh, lovely.
This kind of is within the
nature.
Nature, right? So this is all within this kind of catch-all of the mystical, kind of, right? So I think we have lost that. Or rather, I should say, I think engagement with AI tools and engagement with technology in general, and as we move in a more and more artificial world, and as the more detached we come from the natural world, from the physical world, right, the more we lose that sense of the mystic, right, of the mystical, So, and as I said, I mean this both in the transcendental, spiritual sense, but also in the much wider sense, right? So, everything now becomes mechanical.
Yes.
And now even the way we view, the way we think, right? You can go take it back to philosophy of mind. The mind is just a massive computer, right? There's no sense of the mystical there. There's no sense of maybe something deeper, something that can't be explained purely in neurons firing and hormones balancing themselves, right? Is there something deeper? Is the mind just a collection of electricity and chemicals? Or is there something deeper, something mystical to that? When I love someone or I choose to marry someone, for example, is it just because my hormones have decided that, or is there a deeper mystical choice to that. So I do think, that as we move in a more and more and more technological world, more driven by AI tools, but not just AI tools, more digital, and more further away from the natural, we lose the sense of the mystical, of the divine as well.
Yes.
But also, the transcendental, if you will.
But I think part of that thing of, and I'll come to you now in a second, Jack, to get your view on this, but I think part of that thing of, your mother saying, sit down and talk to God or pray to God, or my sister has another phrase, she says, just find yourself a chair and sit there and think about it. So that act of praying, that meditative act of praying, of talking to oneself or talking to God, can actually allow you to resolve something in your own head. Your own conscious thought, your own moral values, your own moral compass comes out when you sit quietly sometimes with yourself in prayer or faith or meditation. And if you're constantly relying on the tool, the AI, the technical tool, you're losing that sense of your human agency, that sense of moral code, that sense of faith, which gave you maybe that moral code that gives you that guidance. So the AI takes that away sometimes, I feel, like when you don't just sit and pray to Holy God, as my mother would say, and take that moment. So, Jacques, would you agree? Like, how do you feel about this?
I might give so I have my own personal view or how I think these tools have impacted me. And I actually disagree in that I think that personally, and I can't speak for others, algorithms actually and these digital tools really helped me grow closer to this idea of mysticism, to looking at my place in the natural world. And because of the wide variety of information I could get access to, and whilst obviously there is a force of algorithms that they will push you into things that you already have an interest in, because I was on this wide network from a young age, as I've grown up, I've gone through different phases, and when I was, for example, a staunch atheist, and then had a very strong belief in God, and a wide variety of philosophical, religious, etc. kind of views. And I think more than, for example, my grandparents or the people that came before them, I had a much more active role in building my own concept of spirituality. That being said, I recognize what you're referring to, and I recognize that there is sort of, at times I speak to groups of people and they almost have, either sort of spirituality is sort of a mumbo jumbo kind of thing, or people who are just not bothered at all by, they don't even, I think, or I perceive that they don't think about these issues. I actually am not, the older I get, the less sure I am about this. Mm-hmm. Like, they might just prefer to talk about superficial things, or what I consider superficial things, because they don't feel that it's necessarily productive to engage in these discussions. And the older I get, the more I think that they must, at some level, consider these things. But personally, I actually feel like I was able to use these tools to figure out what works for me. And I think I was able to do it in a much more personalized manner because of these tools. And I should say personalized meaning that I picked and choose, not that other people weren't part of this and that my spirituality doesn't factor into a wider spirituality. So I think it's a bit of a knife that cuts both ways.
Well, you've both actually answered my next two questions, which is very, very good, which allows me then to jump completely. And I want to kind of just ask at the end of this, this kind of topic, how can the faith communities then, or the educators, respond effectively, Jean, do you think, in terms of manipulation and this misplaced trust and this confusion that's happening? How do we approach this?
All right, so I think the two words I would use would be advocacy and education.
Explain.
So education, yeah, it's in the word, right? So anything from faith communities and educational communities, schools or more than that, I think have a duty to give some form of literacy, at least, when using these tools. How do these tools function? We're talking before about Facebook, right? So is my Facebook your Facebook, right? Something as simple as that to the more, deeper. So when I give this training to teachers, I always try and catch them out and I say, what does Facebook show you? And I wait for the first person to say, Facebook shows you stuff you like.
Yes,
right?
of course.
I say, no, that's wrong. Right?
Okay.
Facebook shows you stuff you're going to engage with, which is different. stuff you like might be the stuff you engage with, but you could also engage with things you don't like, right? Things that will therefore make you, if I don't like a group of people,
Yes.
and I comment on an article about those group of people, and then I'm going to get more articles about them, and then I become radicalized, and then I would think, extremist in my views. So education and literacy, and also how this affects maybe the wider education also in another sense. I mean, we spoke about the previous question, we were talking about kind of people using these tools, therefore to not have this moral appreciation and the rest, right? This discernment and judgment. Something I focus a lot when I speak with teachers is what we call moral skills.
Okay.
Right. So, and this is not a church concept, right?
Yeah.
There's a concept in literature. So moral skills, another word could be interpersonal skills, human skills, right? Moral skills is a bit of a deeper kind of, right? So in a sense, in school, we're supposed to learn how to compromise, how to respect authority, how to have a sense of integrity and pride in our work, how to voice your opinion with someone you don't like in a way that's proper, acceptable, all these things, right, that we would like a human being to have in society to be civilized, right? But also you could look at the deeper things, right? So, we're all born, at least, on some views of anthropologies, we're all born with a desire for good.
Yes.
Right. But depending on how I'm raised, depending on the culture of that society, we might not always have those same principles of discerning what is good or what is not good. Right.
Yes.
We're supposed to instill this in the young. Now we can argue about what exactly is the good and how do we do this, but ultimately there's a way that we inculcate this skill. Right. So I think the other thing with regards to education is actually giving a space for these skills to be trained.
Yeah.
Even more so in a world where we have a lot of temptations, if I can use, religious language, right? Temptations that pull us away from using these skills, right? If we don't use a skill, kind of like,
But it's reshaping. The technology is reshaping our idea of what it is to be human, our idea of what is culturally acceptable. It's affecting our identity at all levels. I mean, I don't think anyone would really deny that. And so, the dangers that we're seeing, there's dangers in seeking these connections online. Like, people are misunderstanding really what Facebook is kind of doing or what the algorithm is doing. So therefore we're losing depth, we're losing our authenticity and our sense of self and who it is to be me and to be a human. So how do we recover the sacredness of being human then, if it's a data-driven culture?
Yeah.
In that human identity question, like how do we get that back?
Yeah,
then?
I mean, and in a sense, I almost view it as almost, if I can be a bit dramatic, an act of rebellion, right?
Oh, I love a good rebellion. I'm
fantastic.
Irish. What do we have to do?
Thing, right? So I mean, and you touched on this dichotomy very well, right? So on one level, am I just the data that these social media companies or the state or whichever companies have about me? Am I just a collection of data points, right? Where I live, my age, my gender, all of this, what I like, or am I something more, right? Interestingly, the Vatican published a document in January called Antiqua et Nova, Old and New, and kind of said, the first 1/3 of this fairly long document goes something like this, right? It says, we're hearing outside how AI is now becoming more and more like us. So we're starting from that premise, in a sense, because we have intelligence, and this is artificial intelligence, as if, it's kind of like Coke and Coke Light.
We're better.
So is it really the case, right? And the document, this first third of the document, really goes into detail in trying to explore how human beings are so much more richer, so much more, pun intended, fleshed out, right? I mean, the fact that we're embodied and we experience the world through our body, right? Through the particular body I have that none of you have, right? How that affects me. The fact that we have, once again, we mentioned this, right? An appreciation of the truth. Right, we can judge. I can tell you it's raining outside. You can go outside and look for yourself if it's raining or not.
Yeah.
Whereas AI tools don't have that ability of judgment in the sense we have. An ability, the sense of vocation or mission. And you don't need to express this only in couch it in theological terms. So the fact that we desire to have a sense of meaning. Right, we desire to have a sense of purpose. We aim for happiness. Right, like the leaves of a plant that turn towards the sun. AI tools don't have this desire innately in them, unless it's programmed, and arguably programmed not as good, right? So another way how we are much more fleshed out, much more fuller. The ability of not just intelligence in the sense of statistical, processing, even though there's a theory of mind called predictive processing, right?
Yes.
So, the church would want to say, we're not just prediction machines, but surely we're something much more, right?
Yeah.
So even just on level of cognition, the things we do or we're able to do and the things AI systems do are not the same thing. I mean, AI tools do a portion or a part or a segment of the various faculties that we have as human beings, right? So I think a rediscovery of what it truly means to be human, of all these various facets of our humanity
That's
we have.
a beautiful term or phrase, a rediscovery of humanity. That's a lovely way to put. You should write a book with a title like that, Sean. That's a great.
I'll ask for the transcript of the podcast.
Yeah, that's a great line. That's a great line. Jacques, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that?
I like Jean's sort of enthusiasm, because this is something I struggle with a little bit, in that the deeper I get into this topic and the more research I do, on one hand, the more things that I used to hold, especially growing up, as very special to humans, are not proving to not be as special, but are increasingly being able to be sort of almost automated. Even we're seeing, for example, empathy, which was originally considered to be sort of this core human thing that AI cannot mimic well. And whilst I hold it personally, for me, there's no comparison. We are seeing a lot of young people actually turning to these tools, worryingly enough,
I have so many thoughts about this.
I know.
Then jump in at any
Jump
point.
in,
I'm
jump
very
in and
curious
out.
what you-
sorry,
We can go an extra 10 minutes.
So yeah, I like your sort of enthusiasm about, and I agree with you that we do need to do this collective exercise of figuring out, once we have these tools, how do we adapt around them, and how do we keep humans at the center of the world, of the universe. And this is the huge topic, which I have my own thoughts about, but the more I research into and the more I think about, almost the less sure I am.
I love the fact that you're both looking up to heaven as you're both. It's like, God, give me guidance on this.
Exactly.
Both of you are looking up as we're talking about this. Am I going to be struck down or am I going to get help?
Pentecostal moment.
John, jump in there, because you said you had a lot of thoughts on it.
So I think there's a big difference between something, an entity exhibiting a faculty or an entity imitating a faculty. All right? So whereas we are genuinely empathetic, machines are great at imitating empathy, but not empathetic, right? So two very different things in that sense. And therefore, on that level, to carry on, think while still being cautious, because obviously, I don't want to have like a God of the gaps or a humanity of the gaps, therefore, right? This could be another quote. In the sense, we're great because we can do this, and then 10 years down the line, machines do this, and maybe we're great because we do this, just shifting the goalposts. So I'm always wary of not wanting to do that. But deep down, I think I still believe, or I have this, call it a hunch, call it whatever you want to call it, that these core human functions aren't something that, at least with the tools that we have today, can be, or with the level of expertise, technological advancements we have today, cannot be replicated, right? It's like paying someone to be with you, and you saying, I have a friend. Well, you don't really have a friend, or you're paying someone, someone is pretending to be your friend, so you don't feel alone. Right? And I think AI companions, AI therapists, I think, first of all, give us a full sense of this care, empathy, right? I think I would go on to say that they're also even harmful.
Oh yeah, I agree.
They're
fully.
very
I don't-
harmful, yeah.
yeah,
No, they're
I don't
very harmful.
So
Do you believe AI could ever become conscious? And if it did, what would it mean to our idea of soul and personhood?
This is the other second hour of
I know. I had
with
to get the question
11 minutes
in.
down on the clock now.
And AI even gave me questions to ask you, so I'm really.
So consciousness, fantastic question. I would be very, 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 very incredibly surprised if a machine is able to be conscious. And this is just so I don't go, stick my neck out and say absolutely not. And in a sense, because going back maybe just to theories of mind, just on humans, right? So I always struggled with the purely physicalist theories of mind, right?
Okay.
I kind of feel that they are slightly reductive, right? Now, cognizant of the fact that physicalist views tend to be the majority, right? The widely held views. And it doesn't mean, you don't need to go on the full-blown version of the soul a la Catholicism, right? But also maybe even different ideas of the soul, like an Aristotelian kind of sense, right? But there's always this kind of something a bit more than just the physical, right?
Yes.
And as far as we can see, right, machines are just the physical. So given that consciousness is not just, for me, at least I think, obviously I don't know for a fact, right? So this is all theorizing. I think consciousness is not just physical, and therefore, because machines are just physical, I don't think machines, AI, can ever be conscious.
Oh, okay.
But again, we have so many questions there, right? So how do we know? How can we test?
Yeah.
I mean, you run into the same usual problems of consciousness, which is, I don't know if you're conscious, so how can I know if an AI machine is conscious?
Am I even real?
Are you? The other thing is,
some people would wish I
this
wasn't.
podcast has all the marks of an angsty teenager, right? Like free will. Are we in a matrix?
I'm going through a second puberty here. I'm getting it all. It's easy now. I ask loads of teenagers, about this question.
We're just lacking the nihilism.
That's coming. It's on the way.
on the way.
It's absolutely it's on the way. But you talk about consciousness. I was saying to Jacques that I watched. I don't know if you saw the film The Wild Robot.
No.
Oh my God, you need to watch this film, The Wild Robot. And this robot basically, ends up having a level of consciousness. And I started rooting for the robot, which was very funny because considering I wouldn't even have an automatic Hoover in my house,
Okay.
And I was really rooting for the robot. But what I kind of was going, is this something subtly kind of manipulating me to think about what if they were conscious? And it wouldn't be that bad because the robot was really lovely and it was motherly and all of these things. It was almost like this supple little message that somebody out there in the world was giving me. And I just kind of wondered, okay, you're saying it won't happen, but if it did, they still wouldn't be able to share things like our sense of spirituality or awareness or things like that, would they?
Well, there's
how
so
would
many
you
unknowns
feel
there.
living in a world with a conscious robot?
So I think the greatest worry for me, at least initially, if, let us imagine AI machines become conscious.
Imagine, yeah.
Right? So even if this is a minimal level of consciousness, we really have to rethink the way we engage with these machines, right?
This is.
If it's a consciousness that can feel a physical sort of pain, something akin to us, right? Do we send drones into volcanoes, right? If it's like sending a dog into a volcano, would we do that? We wouldn't do that, right? So that's one thing, right? If it's a different type of consciousness, right? If it's a more well-formed consciousness, kind of, like something that looks like ours, right? We have more questions there, right? I mean, if we're training these tools on all the information on the internet, which is not all very pretty, right? We know for a fact that people who vet images of child pornography really experience severe psychological distress, right? So what does this do to a machine like ChatGPT if it's conscious? Feeding it all the data of all the horrific things that are on the internet, right? So this really involves a rethink of how the level of ethical safeguards and ethical norms that we now have to introduce in our interactions with machines is really,
Yes, and I'm going to come to that for
sure.
It's
a rethink. So that's one problem.
Come to that.
And then you have maybe the more existential problems, but we can deal with those maybe later, right?
Jacques, would you like to live as a robot?
Would I like to live as a robot?
No, with a robot.
With a
How would
robot.
you feel about a robot having consciousness? I know my husband thinks it's a great idea because he could turn her off, and she wouldn't be asking.
Oh, as a
questions.
replacement, right?
Yeah, just like she's not going to argue. We just switch it off and it's fine. He sees no problem in it at all. But like, if that robot would not have consciousness, then for sure it's just switch on and off. But how would you feel if a robot had consciousness?
I mean, like my gut reaction is that for me it's very scary, and like consciousness for me is something that is obviously animals have a degree of consciousness, but the level of consciousness that we have is for me special to humans. And in fact, I think actually even if we had to discover that they were kind of conscious, it would actually take us quite a while to sort of do this exercise, as Jean was alluding to, of reshaping our relationship with them. To not only say only the negative side, I would say that though there is something kind of nifty about the idea that we are able to. I know that the Catholic Church warns against this, but the idea that we're almost like gods in a sense, and that we can sort of create life or consciousness.
This is very much in line with Catholic teaching, though. It's not really against.
It's not that we
I mean,
shouldn't
we are
play God. I
invited-
thought that was a core.
No, that's one of these. That's one of those weird objections that people say. I mean, we're always playing God in a sense, right? I mean, when we have children or when we make a table, we are participating in the creative act, right?
True.
And in a sense, we are invited. That one of the big names, big phrases is God became man, so that man can become like God, man and woman, right? So there's a kind of
That's all right.
just to be clear. So we are invited to become like God, and in a sense, to keep on using the couch churchy language, right? Our dominion, right, over the created world is in a sense a type of stewardship given to us by God to exert these, so to speak, godly powers, right? So that wouldn't be itself obstacle to what you were saying, kind of.
And I think the human factor is, it's there throughout, and you've mentioned it multiple times. And, even when we look at, say, education, like we've talked about education, can AI actually make education more human, or are we risking hollowing out the human factor in education? Because, it is the human factor all the time we keep coming back to. So in terms of education, do you think AI is kind of going to hollow out that human factor in education?
So one of the first things I started when I came to Malta is this very, very short kind of session for teachers. And so head teachers, leadership teams invite me over. And I liken it to this like first aid on AI kind of thing, right? So it's really a crash course in 2 hours. So you can't really do much in 2 hours.
No.
But basically, the takeaway from these 2 hours
Look at
is...
an hour.
The takeaway for these 2 hours is just giving teachers a set of questions to ask themselves. On when, where, and how they should or should not integrate AI tools.
Okay.
So there is a space for AI tools within the education process,
Sphere, yeah.
right? Of course, definitely,
Has to be
right?
there.
But the thing is, where are you going to integrate it and where you shouldn't integrate it, right? So it's fantastic if students suffering is struggling with maths and they want more questions, right? So give me a tool that can help me give me more questions and give me answers very quickly, right? For me to practice my maths, for example, or my French, right? So like a French-speaking ChatGPT, and I can practice my diction or whatever.
Yeah.
Great, right? But then obviously the human element is there. So the one thing I tell teachers sometimes, this elicits a bit of gasps. Kind of the main role of the teacher isn't really to impart content. It's to impart skills,
Yes.
right? Those moral skills I spoke of before, and even some technical skills, for example, as well, right? In a sense, content students can learn on their own time after they leave primary school, secondary school, whatever, right? But skills is something that they learn, in school, right? So in London, they opened the first teacherless school September of last year.
That's right. I remember reading
Right,
that.
September of last year. So what's the problem there, right? So if students are just going to be with an AI tutor, we've seen what COVID did. With with isolating students, right? So many issues that arose that we're still dealing with, right?
Yeah.
So if you're just going to give every student their unique personal AI tutor, as fantastic as it sounds, there is the dehumanizing element,
And there's no
right?
support either. There's also times in a child's life where they need a teacher's support, as you say, that
Yeah.
moral code, or there might be a death in the family, or they might be struggling or whatever. And a teacher will see that. And I've experienced this in my own family. So the teacher will see that. The teacher is aware of that. And an AI tool is not aware of
So the two things, I normally tell teachers, remember the teachers you remembered when you were young.
Yes.
Most probably it's not the most intelligent teacher. It's a teacher who
the
either cared
kindest.
for you, took out of a pickle if you were in problem, right? That's one thing. And the other element, I think, is also, teachers who are being afraid, who are afraid that AI will take their jobs. And going back to this formation of skills as opposed to content, I tell them, if you treat your students as machines that should ingest information, then yes, your job could be done by a machine.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? But students, children are not machines, right? So we should treat them with not just wanting to give them the content. Unfortunately, the way our education system runs, not just in Malta, but, is very, the curriculum, a lot of teachers complain about the curriculum being so full. So it's just, we need to make sure the capitals of Europe and,
A, B, C, and D.
the history of the French Revolution. But are you able to argue a point of different points of view of why the French Revolution happened, right? Which viewpoint was better or was worse?
Yeah.
Can
you break it down?
Right? If you're doing a summary in English or in Maltese, the idea is not just that you're able to delete words, but you're reading a long piece of text and you're able to discern which are the salient points of this argument, right?
Yeah.
And how can I summarize those, for example, right? So, Yeah.
We focus a lot in education and when we're having these conversations about the digital sphere, and in 3CL we're big on digital literacy, but I was saying to Jacques earlier on, I was wondering, and you would be the man to answer this maybe, do you see a role for moral or spiritual discernment in digital literacy?
How so?
In that, should we be looking at the moral side of digital literacy? Because we're all about, this is how it works, understand how it works. But we don't sometimes look at the moral codes within digital literacy.
I thought whether digital tools can help us, give us moral formation themselves.
Well, maybe, yes, that you could also look at that.
So let's try and take maybe a common example, right? So let's go back to Facebook. I go back to that because everyone can get Facebook,
your
right?
generation, is it?
It is my generation. I have Twitter. Well, it used to be Twitter. I don't have TikTok, so now you know my generation. Right?
We're not missing anything.
Yeah, and I think the other is where you message most, right? So my sister, she's a generation younger. She messages most on Instagram. I message most on Messenger or WhatsApp, right? So it's a different thing. But anyway,
it's a general.
I'm getting old. But to your question, so let's take Facebook. I think it's one thing speaking about. Telling people how Facebook works, right?
Yes.
The recommendation algorithms and all of that. But then it's another thing, for example, how do you teach when you're reading news, right? The media literacy, right?
Yes.
When you're reading a newspaper article or an article on the newspaper,
true,
a news
false?
article, who's writing it? What is their interest? What's the agenda, right? Where is this article coming from? I would classify that within the moral sphere in a sense, right?
Yes.
I mean, the wider judicious, right, discernment element. I don't know if that is what you had in mind, but I would classify that in the wider, right? It's not just knowing, this will just show me material that I like or that I engage with, right? But I think also making a decision based on, forming an argument or arguing a viewpoint. I think that's also an inherent part of the whole moral judgment.
Sphere of things.
So moral for me is a very wide.
It's a big wide
word.
area.
Yeah, captures a lot of things. Yeah.
Okay. Now we are slightly running out of time, but I've been given extra time, so which is good because I asked AI. Did it have any questions for you? I've covered all the ones that the students gave me and everyone else has given me. So I'm going to go with what AI is giving me now. And I have 3 questions for you, Jean, that AI is curious about. So the first...
So many wrong things in that sentence. Anyway, I'll ignore that.
I will be struck down. I will be struck down. I feel I'm going to get a phone call from my father later on. We're going to have a very serious conversation.
So we had a laugh. No, we did.
So the first question was, if you could offer one guiding principle for humanity's relationship with AI, what would it be?
One guiding principle for our relationship with AI. I think, be human might be a bit too wide, right?
You want the AI to be human? This question has come from AI.
What principles would I like AI to...
What one guiding principle for humanity's relationship with AI, what would it be? If you could offer one guiding principle, what would it be?
I'll quote Radiohead here. Everything in its right place.
Oh, nice.
I like it.
I think so. Using things for what they're intended, and not misusing tools in a context that they weren't intended for.
See, that's why people say you're a rock star. You.
Yes, because of Radiohead, right?
So the second question that AI wanted to ask you, what gives you hope as we move deeper into this technological age?
All right. So I think humanity has been through a lot.
True.
Right? Over, the thousands of years that we've been around. And still, we persist. And still, we're here, right? We've made it so far, right? And I think that says something a lot about, first of all, our level of determination as a species, our inquisitiveness. But I think it also says something about kind of, you remember before we were talking about Gen Z and all the noise they have.
Yeah.
But in a sense, even though deep down, they still have, because they're human beings as well, right? Sometimes we'll forget. The human beings, right? They have this desire for what is good, the desire for the truth.
Yeah.
They have this desire for sense of meaning and purpose, right? So I think this desire that we have that is so ingrained in us,
Yeah.
right? I think that is what will it sustains us,
keep
and
us
at times maybe it might be a bit deafened slowly, so to speak, by the things around us. But I think that will keep us going, and maybe if we veer a bit, maybe too much off course, or right, I think that always brings us back. Sometimes, obviously, unfortunately, the history of humanity has shown us that we might need to make a mistake or two.
Yes.
And sometimes those mistakes or two were very costly mistakes. Look at wars, for example,
Yes.
right? But I think there was always that time where we said, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Yes.
And then we return.
And then we go
Now
back.
you can argue that, we're a bit hard-headed and it takes a long time for us to learn. But we always, come back and say maybe
Back
this
on course.
kind of, I think, yeah.
And the third question
All right.
that the AI bot wanted to know, how can humans begin to live more consciously and ethically alongside our technology? I don't know this AI bot personally or anything. I just literally...
Yeah, they're out to get me.
Yeah.
I think we mentioned a lot of these things, no? Though I like the answer to this. I think kind of you said, grab a chair. When you said that, you reminded me of Pascal's. We mentioned this, right? Pascal's, right? All of man's problems arise from his inability to sit down alone in a room,
Alone with
right?
himself.
So I think just finding time to be alone, finding time to be a bit inefficient, finding time to be in contact with nature. I'm a chaplain at a junior school, at a primary school, and they dress up. The part of their uniform, these really young little children, they wear these boiler suits like they're going off into a welding factory or whatever, and they just let them out in the garden and they run wild.
Dirty.
They break. They
Yes.
they don't climb trees, but anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So they just run wild, and they're in touch with nature. So I think just touching grass, I think,
Touching
is
it, that's
Yeah.
My sister would be so happy with this.
There's a school in Wicklow that is like that now. That it's all out.
Yeah,
wild.
see, yeah.
It just opened this year. In
So I
Wicklow,
think,
Ireland.
I think just finding time to stop. I joke with people that I say, let's do two things that AI definitely can't. Let's say a prayer and pour a glass of wine, and and I think doing those things, fantastic.
I went straight for the glass of wine there. The minute he said it, I went, absolutely, I'm with you there. We could have gone on for 2 hours here today. It was just fabulous, Jean. I thank you so much. There was a lot to consider in all of that. So I think the AI will be happy with your answers. I do.
Even if it isn't, I really don't care. I care what you think. I care what you think.
I
See?
loved your
But
answers.
thank you.
So there
Thank you.
go.
I really enjoyed being here. So thank you very much.
I loved your answers. So that really was a lot to consider. Jacques, thank you as always for helping me out today and being here for this conversation.